then, well, some of you might recognise this as being my interpretation of a Gilbert Invader dashboard, rather modernised with a retro mod style. I wanted to cover it again because of a lot of work being done and some more work upcoming, in fact. Obviously we have a touch screen going on in here and a wireless charging phone holder. So yeah, very much unlike the original, and another way it's unlike the original is not having any exposed edges to the plywood where it has been cut away for switches to go through, because I've been using these alloy switches from Car Builder Solutions, which more of which in a moment. A lot of work's happened since I showed it last time, and I did make a bit of a thing about using PC style ATX connectors, and believe me, it would not be possible to fit this dash into the car were it not for multi-pin connectors. So what's happened since last time? I'm going to turn you round because this is where all the action is. So this wiring installation has undergone a lot of, let's say, development since you saw it last time, where it did look something like a bird's nest. Which I may have said at the time. It still looks a little bit like a bird's nest, to be fair. Well, this sort of stuff would be better if it was neater, but this is where I've reached after a considerable amount of time, and I have my two ATX connectors. Two because 24 pins wasn't enough. Had to use two of them, and I think I've got possibly 3 spare cables on this one, which could be used for something else. But the point about this work has been to neatify it, beautify it, you might say, and the key to that is reduce the length of any spare coils of wire to an absolute minimum. When you've done that, and when you're doing that, which means, in my case, repeated shortening and re-termination, putting new spade clips and so on the end, and shorter and shorter and shorter, organising the routing of the individual cables to be as kind of logical as possible, no excess length and no loop backs, which I did have some of, and that eventually enables the binding of the individual strands to a much greater degree than was possible before. However, the fact remains that all these gauges and all these switches are all individual terminals, and in fact I think they're 2.8mm spade terminals, also known as motorcycle terminals, and they are nice and compact. Actually, I quite like them compared to the great big traditional spade terminal type. Other things that have come to light since I have done this work are, well, 2 things in particular I'm thinking of, both related to those alloy switches. I'll just come over here. So one thing that came to light is front spotlights, which you might have seen a video about a little while ago. I did wonder whether the switch element in here would be strong enough to power, hello Jessica, would be strong enough to power a pair of spot lamps, and I checked on the Car Builder's website to see the rating of the switch, and it's 6 amps, and the power, as I measured it, for the spotlights is in fact somewhere between 8 and 9 amps, so oh dear, that's no good then. So guess what, another relay, and here it is. So in my recent talk about relays, one thing I didn't mention was possibly the most important thing. Why do you use, or I didn't point it out sufficiently, why do you use a relay rather than just a switch? Well, the answer is you can use a nice little switch any size you like, or a delicate looking switch, or a nice stylish switch, and don't need to worry about the power or the current requirement of the thing you're attaching to it. and things that take a lot of current are in particular lamps, and in even more particular incandescent lamps, the traditional sort, if you like. So typically that's 55 watts per lamp, and that's 110 watts, and you can do the maths. Watts is current times voltage, so 12 volts, yeah, you're into the 9 and 10 amp and range easily with a pair of spotlights. So I've had to use a relay up here, and the relay is turned on by a switch, or one of these alloy switches. So I've kind of offset the work, if you like, that is needed for that to make it work without burning out. The other thing that has become apparent is about the mounting of those switches. Now I'm going to put this edge on. Now I don't know whether you can see. Let's have a whoops, switch the light on. This wood is fairly thick, and these collars, which are multifunctional, are also fairly thick. You can use them for mounting in thin panels, or like this. But the problem is, with the thickness of the wood and the thickness of the collar, unfortunately it's not possible to push the switch element fully home. So I'm going to have to replace all this, all these collars here, and replace with washers. So I've got some 16mm washers on order, and all of these will become flatter, and I can push everything home. I did wonder why some of them switches weren't working, and that was because they basically weren't going in far enough. So that's explained that. As I mentioned, a lot of works had to happen which was kind of incomplete before, including the changeover switching for the heater, the air conditioning switch, and the electronic parking brake switch, which are actually quite similar to each other, and indeed fairly similar to the electric windows that I did a little while ago, electric window switching, with a kind of changeover facility, so you switch either side between plus and minus. Anyway, so that had to be sorted out. It wasn't. The front fog light switch I mentioned also wasn't. We have had to add on a low fuel warning light, which was not present, strangely, in the fuel gauge that I've got. I've got a low brake fluid light, which wasn't wired up, and so and my USB charger, which is right next to the phone holder. So yeah, a lot of extra R&D happened. Now, one thing that's very obvious when you've got this number of connectors, nearly over 40 of them in total, there's quite a strong chance of getting them misaligned. Lots of wires all looking very much the same, connected up wrong, and so on and so on. So what happened when I plugged it into the car? There was a buzzing noise. Why is there a buzzing noise? Because it was a relay, one of the dashboard relays, not on here, it's in the car itself, trying to switch itself off and on again because it's getting overloaded, considering I got very, very thin wire. Just as well I was powering it from very, very thin wire, because otherwise there'd probably have been melted wire, and the smoke would have escaped, as they say. So lots of investigation was required, and in fact I didn't find anything grossly wrong with the plugs. After all, I kind of assumed that I'd got a wire cross somewhere, but no! What was the problem? The problem was these switches here. Now these are DP-DT switches, and these ones are in fact double, so it's 2 times switch. And I had made an assumption without checking how they worked. I assumed when you've got 3 pins, I'm going to zoom in on this. Can I zoom in? Right, so at the back of these switches, 1, 2, 3 connections, and I had made an assumption without checking about how they worked, which was something like this. So there'd be a common contact in the middle that would connect to either one side or the other. Wrong. In fact, if you look very carefully, I don't know if you'll be able to see it, the lighting's not very good and the printing's not very bright. But no, in fact, it's very much unlike this. In fact, it's much more like that. So one common contact at the end, switching between the two other end terminals, and by getting it wrong in that way, I had in fact created a short circuit. Fantastic. Well, it does show the value of protecting the whole installation by use of a fused low power on a long thin wire connection in order to prevent smoke escaping. So luckily all I've got to do is to swap the wires over here. And why did this happen? Because guess what, I didn't look at the instructions. And by the way, how many of these have I got? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of these in total, and they're all wired up the same wrong way. Well, that's all the switches swapped around according to the correct diagram on the side, and hopefully there's no longer any short circuits. One thing I've done recently is to alter the wiring, and the reason I did that was because, as I mentioned, these are very tidy connectors, these ATX connectors, but the wires into them are a little bit thin considering things like spotlights and heated rear window, and so I've doubled up. I did have some doubling up before, but I've changed the way that the wires are doubled up. So 2 wires being used for the same function. So I've doubled up the wire coming in for the main beam, which was previously just an indicator light, and for the spotlights, as I mentioned. So we've got this relay up here, but it's all the wiring is double. So we've got two wires coming for the main beam, 2 wires coming back out for the spot lamps. So that is 4 wires being used for the same function. And by the same token, I've also doubled up the wiring for the heated rear window, which has also meant I've had to double up the wire for the ignition live connections, because again, heated rear window is a fairly powerful item, and therefore that's been doubled up as well. Because I've changed the arrangement because I've changed the arrangements in the plug on here, I'm going to have to now do the same thing on the car. So that's obviously going to take me some time to get that aligned. You know what? I'm still not satisfied with it, so it's going to have to be reworked, and more heat shrink and ring terminals to go on these gauges. So let's see what I can do. I have just swapped these retaining collars because of the thickness of this board, rather than using these things, which have to be that way up, otherwise you can't get in there to screw it down with your fingers, obviously very thick. So I've just replaced it with these admittedly surprisingly thick washers instead, so they now look like that. And it also means, crucially, I can push the switch sufficiently down so it locks into place on the button end, and that means that the latching switches actually do latch. Yes, I've moved to ring terminals on the back of the meters because they are quite a bit tidier, neater than spade terminals. In fact, I can show you one. Can you see that? Goes on very neatly compared to a spade terminal, much smaller, and because you can stack them on the little connection studs on the meters, it means you don't have that annoying thing where you're trying to get more than one wire into the same terminal. So yeah, I think that's quite a bit better. And as you see, I've also bent over the illumination, the little bulbs. I've bent them over through 90 degrees so they come out sideways as well. So I think that's quite a bit better. And I have done some more optimisation of the lengths of the wires and so on. I have got some spares over here which may not be required depending on sensors and things, which I haven't yet got. So I may cut those off in due course when I'm sure I've got the right things and everything's working. So yeah, a little bit less like a bird's nest, but really now I need to go and fit the thing in the car and actually see what it's like in real life. So this is the most complete dash installation of the Goulburn has ever been, including the knee rolls on that side, and also now on this side. Where's the other end of it? And the steering column shroud, which actually interrupts the knee roll, but that's fine. The original Vauxhall steering wheel, which incorporates a logo which is not completely different from the Goulburn one, but I have worked out how that can be replaced with something slightly more appropriate, and it's a pretty good looking wheel actually, I have to say. And the horn even works. Well, it does if everything is switched on, which isn't 100% at the moment. A lot of work has gone into the wiring, and a lot of which was to do with the control unit for the electric power steering, which now lives up under here, under the bottom of the steering column, whereas for a while it was down the back of here. But it caused a lot of trouble regarding space for the wiring and the tubes for the screen vent each side, especially that one, which previously were not there, but I had to fit everything in, and that meant a number of different reworks, so that's why it's taken such a long time. Still not quite 100% done, because as you can see here, or maybe you can't, it's rather dark. Yeah, my fuse boxes are currently dangling, and obviously there's other things in the car like electric window wiring, which while it's not it's working, it needs to be fully installed with the switches, which I haven't quite decided where they're going to go yet. But nevertheless, it's all come together, all these switches and so on, a lot of which are actually working, some of which require extra work at the back of the car for heated rear window and so on. For example, bits and pieces I would say, but the basic shape of the dash is in fact complete, and even with a phone holder, which I shall just put my phone into. There we go, and that is a wireless charging cradle. There's USB sockets that it and any other phone can plug into behind, and these little knobs here, headlamp switch and heater fan control, which work quite well. View through the steering column or steering wheel, not bad, but as you can see there's a bit of a problem there. So yeah, I'm going to have to remake this wooden blank, mainly for that reason actually. The clocks are going to need to move ever so slightly upwards, and all three of these buttons, or warning lamps rather, need to be up a little bit, and while we're at it, might as well move them to the right, which is where they were meant to be in the first place. So yeah, it's definitely coming together, and let's see if I can demo anything. So there is my rotary headlamp switch, you can see shining on the end of the garage there. That's using a rotary switch, which in turn operates some relays. I'm pretty pleased with that. And similarly for the, I think the ignition needs to be another step. There we go, and we've got some activity from the clocks, from the touchscreen, and indeed from the fan. And something happens there. We'll switch the fan, the screen resets, not quite sure what that is, but anyway, this clock's not quite straight, is it? But this is how it's looking. Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to the day when I'm able to remake the dashboard. Cut out a new piece of wood. In fact, I've got a new piece of plywood just over there waiting for it, and it will be almost the same as this one, but with the clocks in a slightly different position. There's one or two holes that shouldn't be there, and well, that's it really. But I've even marked out the position. Can you see the position for a glove box? So there we have it. And it's just picked up my, is it? Yes, it's just picked up my, and it's picked up some music playing from my phone through Bluetooth, which I shall have to stop before it gets copyrighted. So yeah, this is how it looks, and it's taken a fairly unbelievable amount of time. And the reason for the amount of time is because of the number of times I've had to redo the same thing. And one thing I will say, the value of getting pre-terminated connectors, certainly in the case of the relay bases, nah, I wouldn't do that again, because I finished up stripping out some of those pre-terminated sections and replacing them with fully ones that I've fully made. And it's neater because it removes joints. I think yesterday I removed about 8 soldered and heat shrunk lovely joints in their way, but even more lovely to not have them at all. So I got rid of about 10 or 12 of those yesterday when I did a bunch of reworks on it. And neatness is your friend with this type of stuff. And physical installation, working out what can go where, especially the control box for the electric power steering, Vauxhall Corsa electric power steering, which is a box about the size of my, size of my hand. And it's surprising when you're already congested behind here how crucial a space like that actually is. So while I won't say this is in any way completed, what I will say is that it's now, I would say, wiring from a wiring point of view, I'm going to ignore the engine because it has its own wiring harness. From a body wiring point of view, I would say it's now 90% done. So it'll take me another little while to completely complete the job, but we are very much getting there. And I'm particularly, as I've said before, particularly pleased with my headlamp switch. So this is not the end of this sub-project, but what it is getting there. Hello doggies, how you doing? Jasper, where are you? Hello Jasper. Hello Jasper. Black dog in a dark corner. Oh, you're easier to find, aren't you, Jessica? Jessica. There you are.